Welcome to the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new incising horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs on FX at 10/9 Central. I'm your host, Blair Knight Graves from ShowRatings.tv, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, who's also from ShowRatings.tv. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLovesTV, and remember that's BLAIRE, and at KyleLovesTV. And you can also follow this podcast's Twitter handle at TheStrainPod. Hi, Kyle. How are you doing today?
Blair with an E. I'm ready to incise my way into the this episode, aka the last call for annoying neighbor Trip Taylor.
Yes.
The main story of this episode, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh boy.
Trip Taylor got his curtain call.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Very happy with that.
Quite comically. Today, Kyle, you and I are going to be discussing Season 1, Episode 5, Runaways, which was written by Jennifer Hutchinson, who is known for her work on Breaking Bad, for which she received 2 Writers Guild of America awards. She also was a writer on The Lone Gunman, The X-Files, Star Trek Enterprise, Grey's Anatomy, and Mad Men, which is quite an array of shows.
That sure is. My goodness.
And now The Strain.
Now The Strain.
Yes.
Well, we're yet to find out if that's going to look like a dark spot on her resume or not.
The jury's still out, is what you're saying?
Jury's still out.
Yes. Overall, just quick impression before we dig deep. What did you think of Runaways?
You could read my full review at showratings.tv as usual. I thought this was a very good episode, and I read today that the entire internet pretty much thinks it's a very bad episode, and I'm very interested in that because for me, as I wrote in my review, this was the series' most mature episode to date. And I'm wondering if that's actually the case, or if I'm just adjusting my expectations. And if I'm just coming to terms with what this show is, and as, you know, we've talked about every week, the apocalypse progressing, that as we're really getting into it now, if I'm just ready to sort of embrace the mindlessness of it all. Whereas other people, I think, might just be discovering how mindless it is. And so maybe we're just at different points of understanding, or we want to be at different points. I don't know, but I like this episode. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I didn't have nearly the problems that I've had with the previous episodes. And so, I had a good time.
Good. Well, just like every episode preceding,
Sure.
Or rather, every episode that comes out, I love the newest episode more than I loved all of the last combined.
Your enjoyment of The Strain is a line with a slope of 1. Just goes straight up diagonally.
Yes. Oh goodness, you're starting to. Don't talk about things I'm not good at. But
I will make math jokes. Don't even think for a second that I won't make math jokes.
I know. Just don't test me on Excel and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I thought Runaways was a fantastic episode. Part of that is obviously because it was opening up the doors to the apocalypse as the vampires escape the sewers and start to wreak havoc on New York City, which... Again, you can ask my roommates. You can probably ask them this every week, but I just started kicking and screaming excitedly, like, "Yes, it's happening! It's finally happening!" And then, of course, there were the flashbacks, which are another part of one of my favorite parts of the books, which is Satrakian's background of having initially seen the vampires in World War II when he was in the concentration camps. Just overall, I thought that the dialogue was more meaningful between the characters who had dialogue, and I cared more about everything that was happening. Just every subsequent episode, I care more and more about the characters as television characters, not just as characters that I have read in the books. And, you know, here's the disclaimer. The biggest difference between Kyle and I
as always
is that I've read the books and he hasn't. Other than that, we're identical.
Yeah. I should say, give my own disclaimer, I don't care about these characters at all. I think the characters are wooden and two-dimensional to a degree that is almost stunning. But that I'm getting past that. Like, I don't think that that's a requirement for something to be enjoyable. I think it's certainly could be a better show if the characters were written like human beings. But I think that the show does enough good things that I can avoid getting hung up on that in episodes like this, where I feel like it was very propulsive and very this episode felt like it had a sense of purpose, and nothing in this I felt was as outwardly stupid as some of the stuff that's happened previously. Like I didn't nothing that happened in this episode really took me out of the world of the show because it just rang so false. Which is this is the first episode since the pilot that's been the case. So yeah, I mean that's again I don't know if we need the world's greatest, like to me the Strain doesn't have to be the world's best show for it to be a good show and an enjoyable show, and I'm enjoying it. And so I really like this episode, even though I think there are still problems that persist in the series that aren't going away anytime soon.
Well, I don't know about you, but for me, one of the things that I found enjoyable about this episode, which I also found enjoyable about last week's episode we covered in the podcast, was that I felt that there was horror through and through.
Yes.
And it was pretty well balanced when you would have exposition versus something absolutely awful happening. And I feel that the show, when it's not just saving everything until the very last couple of minutes,
Yes.
It excels because when it spreads it out and it allows it to have moments where it breathes and moments where you're cringing. I don't know. Did you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, I certainly think so. And but I think this episode did something really clever that I think a lot of people writing about the show kind of missed. And I understand that because they're worried about other stuff. But the two, we talked last week about how Gus's story was the sort of non-vampire story of the hour. How every episode of The Strain so far has had these human stories. I guess quote unquote human stories, because technically they're all human stories. But I mean, stories that I use the word quarantined. They're quarantined from the vampire apocalypse, like the custody stuff, like I mean, there's like every episode there seems to be one storyline, like Vasily's material in previous episodes, where it's just it has nothing directly to do with vampires. It's just setting up a character in some way, and I think a lot of the problems with the show have involved those stories because again the characters aren't very well written and I don't think they're very well drawn, and so when you take away the vampires suddenly they have to stand on their own. And what this episode did really smartly is it had two non-vampire stories initially in Nora and her mother and Vasily and his rats for the third time, but both those stories by the end became vampire stories.
Yes.
And that's the first time that the show has done that. It's the first time the show has started with a non-vampire story and turned it into a vampire story. And that felt like it was the first time I had a sense that this is an invasion. It's with the show it's like it's F versus the vampires, or it's like the vampires are happening over here, but then the world's happening over here, and I know that's intentional, but it's also like it's just like we would be visiting these different parts of the world almost, and it felt like these characters didn't exist in the same universe because so. Over here, some characters are fighting a monster vampire, and over here, some guy is worried about rats in a kitchen. And so now we get this episode where the guy worried about rats in the kitchen decides to investigate those rats and finds a swarm of vampires. And the girl, who's taking care of her mother this whole episode and denying the nature of this whole apocalypse, suddenly vampires are at her door. And it's like, wow, like that gave me a real sense of what I think the show is trying to convey, which is this invasion that's happening and this imminent danger. And yeah.
Do you also feel, though, that I thought that we've talked about this before, that the show initially set it up to be as though F was going to be our only perspective character, but the show has slowly started to allow other characters to be perspective characters, and I feel very strongly that we got Nora's familial perspective, and we got Vass sort of, just being sort of a smarmy guy perspective, like just kind of following them in what would otherwise be their everyday lives. And as you said, then those once quarantined moments of normalcy are taken over by the what's horrifically going on about this infestation, this invasion, this apocalypse. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Would you agree that part of that was that we successfully got other characters' perspectives besides F's?
I think the show did that. I agree that the show did that. Whether it was successful or not, I think is up for debate. Um, I think F is still the only character who's given more than one dimension to play. You know, what did we learn about Gus last week? He loves his mother. Okay. It's like that's it. Gus is a gangster who loves his mother. You know everything. You now know everything you ever need to know about that character. Like that's the character. There's nothing deeper than that. Like we've all Gus's screen time has been to establish that very simple thing. Nora Nora is equally simple, and this her material in this episode. I mean, we've first of all we've seen it 2 dozen times. Like her mother who is you know in the nursing home, but possesses amazing insight as to the specific problems that are plaguing Nora right now. When they sit down and talk about, you know, they sit down and talk about Nora's state of mind, and of course her mother is sagely and has like the perfect advice, and it's like okay, okay, but you know, I mean like just stuff like that, and of course Vasily, like all that we know about Vasily is that he's pretty much a badass. We're fine by me.
Wonderful.
Good for me. Yeah, not complaining about that. But I mean, you know, we only have one character that's even verging on 3 dimensions, and it's F. Having said that, I do appreciate the show's attempts. At least it's making an effort to follow other characters. I just don't think that effort so far has been that successful.
That's sort of fascinating. I mean, I agree with you that he's the only character that we've added much more character to.
Well, he has a perspective.
Yes, he has a perspective, but I am the most bored when F is on screen, which
Sure.
makes me sort of sad because I love Corey Stoll, and in the books, the character of F is very fun to follow when you're in his perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know. I know we talked about this a lot before, but like that wig is starting to really bother me.
Yes, of course.
To the point of distraction.
Sure.
And then I feel like he talks too much. Like nothing happens around his character. Like him and Abe, I thought like I loved all of Abe's flashback scenes, but I didn't really care much. I mean, I loved we should get into the segments of this episode, but I loved it when Anne Marie was just hanging there and they walk past and she's hanging in the background and they're just acting like nothing is happening. That's such a scientist way of mind and a vampire hunter way of mind that is still simultaneously horrifying that there's just a body hanging behind them while they walk off into the distance.
Right.
So there are a lot of things I love that happen around F. I liked it when he did the autopsy and all that stuff. And I really loved the end sequence when he had all his credentials taken away from him. Mm-hmm. But whenever he just has to sit down and talk to somebody, I kind of get bored.
Oh, he's given a lot of stereotypical television difficult male anti-hero business to do. I mean, he's really like I don't know if I suspected that's more an influence of television. Like from what you say about the book, it sounds like that it was better spread out. Like that seems to be like the TV influencing the show as opposed to the way the character was written. Like we know that television shows on cable networks on Sunday night are about difficult men, and so F is being portrayed as a difficult man, and who delivers very serious speeches about. Oh, what did he talk? He had some really stupid speech in this episode that he delivered to Abe when they were in the van.
Oh, about his car, his British car.
Gag me. Gag me. I mean, just really, really awful.
I noted that.
I mean, every week F has just a terrible monologue. This week might have been the worst yet. That was just a dreadful scene.
That one was terrible, but I actually very much enjoyed the butterfly one. I don't know how you felt about that. When he's talking, you didn't like it?
I might have blocked it out of my mind.
When he's getting his credentials taken away from the CDC, he's talking to Everett and Jim Kent, and he says, you know, it's a disease. They go dormant. They're like caterpillars that are becoming butterflies, except they don't come out to be these beautiful creatures, they come out to be like these monsters, and
I know,
they're
I know he's a scientist, but does he need to make an animal metaphor for everything? First of all, he's a CDC scientist, so presumably he's studying diseases that occur mostly in humans. Um, like remember last week it was the bird flu that he
yeah.
referenced, and then this week it's butterflies and like, come on, F. Like I, you know what? You know what I don't need when explaining the vampires? Metaphors. I don't think I need a metaphor in that case. Like I think Jim Kent. He was only talking to Jim Kent, by the way.
No,
Who's
he was talking to Everett.
oh Everett? What's
Everett, who is one of the other guys at the
oh his
CDC, the one who
boss?
takes his the one who takes his
Oh I
credentials
didn't realize
away.
Everett was still in that scene when that.
Yeah.
Okay, well fair enough. But I don't know. It seems strained. He always goes for the metaphor, and I just I don't know if I need that. Like it's nothing says a lack of urgency like my main character using metaphors. Like it's because it's like it's like you're just circling around the issue. Like I'd rather him just say it.
Well, I personally liked that. I liked that monologue, and we can just agree to disagree. But I thought that it was a good way for him to be trying to describe it to another character while he's sort of but because before that he's not making any sense. He's like speaking wildly, and then he's like, okay, I have to button down and say something that makes sense. And so he's struggling for his words, and he's trying to show
Yeah.
this video, and the guy is refusing to look at the video, so he starts yelling at him, it's like a caterpillar.
Yeah.
And it felt like, when somebody's not listening to you and you can't get your words out because you're flustered, like sometimes you just have to go for the most simplified version of what's happening. And I liked it. I enjoyed it. And I thought it was a fun way to describe these really horrific creatures.
Yeah. Sure.
But let's talk about the episode as a whole.
Yeah,
Let's go
let's
into
do it.
every scene.
Yeah.
Okay, so we open the episode with Bolivar's manager bringing Dr. Evanston to him.
Yeah.
Is she a urologist or a neurologist?
She is a urologist, and as I tweeted, we're a little late in the game for a urologist, unfortunately. we we have moved past the point where that is useful.
Yes. Well, Dr. Evanston arrives to come and inspect Bolivar, only to be eaten horrifically within the first 2 minutes
Yeah,
of the
right
episode.
away.
Yeah, like no holds bar. We're gonna have some scary stuff go down in this episode.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that, and then the very stereotypical sort of horror movie thing where the manager rocks away and breaks her
gosh. It's as if the very concept of cliche manifested itself and tripped her. Like, I mean, really, she's gonna sprain her ankle on the way out because, of course.
It was fascinating because I thought that scene was so effective, and then they have her sprain her ankle and then walk away and then have like a 30-second phone call.
Why?
And it was so boring.
Why? Why does I know why that phone call existed, because the show has some level of awareness that the audience is like, hey, dum-dums, how about you call the cops? Like, why hasn't anyone alerted anyone in power yet? Other than F, who at the end of this episode is the first time anyone in power gets alerted to anything. And so, like, that scene was, like, expressly included and painstakingly laid out. Again, it was like a 2-minute scene. Like, of her limping out, finding an alley, and then, like, calling a fixer.
And saying, I cannot be connected to this in any way.
Right, it was designed to illustrate the point that was spoken by some character or another earlier in a different episode about how the master preys on human selfishness and the desire for self-preservation, and that's obviously a point that the show is hammering home with a sledgehammer. Real like just driving it home over and over.
Well, but where it was ineffective with that dialogue, I felt that once, the initial scene where Bolivar is just eating his doctor alive, and then the subsequent scene where the fixer shows up to kind of clean up everything, I think that was incredibly effective. Like, I thought the performance, I can't recall the name of the actor who plays Bolivar right now, but his performance was terrifying.
Hold on. Yes, true. That scene was all about the fixer. That dude was awesome. I was so disappointed in a way that character was doomed from the start, because I want that character to be a point of view character on this show. Like, I need someone who's nonplussed and who's a professional and who like is very good at what he does. And I guess that very well could be Vasily. I guess that
Yeah.
that's the role that Vasily is playing. I could use another one. you know, like I
It's
enjoyed his presence.
it's so funny that you would say that because throughout that scene before he met his untimely end,
Yeah.
uh, I had a moment of crisis where I was like, "Is this a perspective character that I've forgotten?"
Oh,
Because that's how well
yeah.
that character or maybe it might have not been that great of dialogue. It might have all been in that performance,
Yeah.
but I literally had a moment of panic where I went on Google and tried to find that character, and sure enough, he was just like a
Yeah, just a
throwaway. But
throwaway, died in 2 minutes. But I feel like, genuinely, I'm not saying this is a joke, I feel like I understand that character better than I understand every character on this show other than F. Every
wow,
single one. And from 90 seconds of screen time, I have a better sense of who that fixer is. I can better place him. I better understand his motivations than I do of Nora, than I do of Jim Kent, than I do of all these people who, to me, play like cardboard cutouts of people. But that fixer felt like a real character. Like, he's a guy who does his job and who sees blood all the time, and who's just, he's just there to get paid. And he's like a repo man almost. Like, he has the same swagger as a repo man, where he's packing and he doesn't care if you act up because he's seen it all. Like, I got that character. And it's part of the performance, and I think he was written in a really nice way for the 3 lines that he had. And yeah, like, that to me was like a little window into, like, boy, if all the characters were this effective, how much more would I like this show? Like, this would be like the best show on TV if every character was introduced as economically as the fixer was.
well, do you feel that that does give you a little bit of hope that that could be more characters will show up like that in the future? Um,
Kind of, but I also feel like it was almost an accident on the show's part.
yeah,
Like, the fact that he died instantly kind of makes me think that the show stumbled into it and doesn't really know how to replicate it. So,
right.
so maybe.
Well, the hope I have there is that the writer of this episode, Jennifer Hutchison, as we said before, she wrote for the Lone Gunman and the X-Files, and that the way that that character was written
Mhm,
was very much like a character from the Lone
that makes
Gunman.
sense.
So I hope that if she's staying on the Strain staff, that she can bring some more of that kind of humor and terror all at the same time
Yeah.
to whether they're throwaway characters or breathing a little bit of extra life into our main
Right.
cast.
And this is a Walking Dead thing too, where when The Walking Dead was at its absolute worst in seasons 2 and 3, when it was just boring and static and just caught in the quicksand that surrounded the farm. Walking Dead fans will get that reference. Um, the only signs of life it ever showed is when another human would show up. And that human would always die by the end of the episode, because of course they would, because it's The Walking Dead. But there was an episode where oh, I forget the actor, but the actor from oh, that short-lived FX show, buddy cop show starring Donald Logue, and then this guy, I'm blanking on his name. Uh,
No idea.
um, but he showed up as like a Philly fan, and he was awesome. And and he died, but like that episode was the best of the season. And and it's like that with this kind of show, that's a chance to introduce interesting characters. When you get like a short-lived character, you can really make them into something rather than just sort of this blank cipher that so many of these characters are.
Right, right. Yeah.
It's called Terriers,
Well,
by the way. Sorry, the show is called Terriers, and the actor is Michael Raymond James. I had to Google
I
it.
I don't know who that is. I'll have to Google him later.
He's really, really good, and you should watch Terriers. It's a terrific, short-lived show.
Was it like a season?
1 season, 12 episodes.
Oh, yeah, I can knock that out of the park. All right.
Really.
Moving on.
Yes.
Oh, I had a question for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the next story that we're gonna get to is F's story,
Sure.
where he and Abe are either at F's home or eating at the home of the now deceased Emma and father. Were they
That was
eating?
my impression. Um,
Were they eating the eggs of a dead family?
yes, and doing the dishes. Abe very kindly did their dishes after they ate their breakfast. I wrote in my review that they had a delicious breakfast of eggs and exposition. Abe basically laid out the story to date of the show in about a 7-minute monologue. So that was good. Luckily, that's a terrific actor. Um, and so it went okay. It
Yeah,
could,
so he's making it fun.
yeah, he's making it fun, and it was good to learn about like the master and all that. Like I sci-fi shows have to do that. So,
Yeah.
but then we embarked on the quest for F to capture a viral video of a vampire, which was pretty much the central thrust of this episode.
Which did you find that effective
I
or?
thought it was, I thought it was pretty silly and it pretty clearly doomed from the get go. If F would have just taken a second to listen to himself, saying like, "I'm gonna get a video and go show my bosses, and then they're gonna stop behaving like idiots." It's like no, F, it's not going to work out that way. You know this, but I mean, it gave him an excuse to pair up with Abe, and I really liked the line that Abe had about like you think you're recruiting me, but I'm actually recruiting you. I
Yeah,
thought that was cool.
I wrote that line down. You believe you're drafting me into your cause, but the reality is that I'm drafting you into mine.
Yeah, good. That's like
Yeah.
effective. Like I get it, and
Yep.
and yeah, that made sense. That was good writing.
Yeah, and I felt actually like as silly as it was for him to sort of be filming Ansel, just kind of like tossing himself around in his own shed.
Yeah.
I I really, as I said earlier, really enjoyed the discovery of Anne Marie's body. I really enjoyed them going in and F really having to deal with his first sort of older vampire because I
Well,
guess every time that he's going to deal with a vampire, they're going to be further along
yes,
in their process, and he's not going to know exactly how to deal with it each time because his first one was, as we talked about, the baby vampire who didn't really know how to use its stinger. Then you have little Emma, who is just like I would freeze if an 8-year-old
mm-hmm.
tried to eat me. And then you have Ansel, who so far I think is the scariest looking of all of them.
Sure.
And it's fascinating to see as F is starting to accept all these horrific things that are happening around him. And I don't know why, but I was very, very attached to that scene with Anne Marie. The way that they just sort of decided not to take her body down and walked away from it casually. There's something very powerful
Yeah.
about that decision that not to honor the dead.
Yes, it further establishes that the world is changing because you obviously
Yes.
wouldn't leave a body hanging if
Right.
things were normal. And like that's afterwards when Abe just casually lights the shed on fire. Like you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't light a shed on fire. Like that's a real crime. That's arson. But it's like we're clearly dealing with bigger stuff than that. Although you would think the neighbors, I know one of the neighbors has been eaten and beheaded, but you would think another neighbor would be like, "Hey, your shed's on fire, and you guys are wielding a sword and a nail gun. What is happening?"
Maybe we should stay inside.
Yeah, I will say I was a little bit disappointed by the decision to kill off Anne Marie so quickly. I thought that we were setting up last week. We spent so much time with her last week. I thought we were setting up a situation in which she snaps and starts taking care of her vampire husband. Like, she fed him the neighbor. I thought she was going to start recruiting people and feeding them to him. Like I thought this was going to be a long-term thing. So I was a little disappointed to find her dead this week because it seemed like we set that up kind of nicely to where she would be this sort of crazy person who, is like just on the vampire side basically because she loves her husband and refuses to acknowledge that he's dead. Like I don't know, it just seemed a little bit weird to kill her off so soon after we just introduced her. Like I don't know. It seems like a lot of track was laid for a conclusion that we're going to see 1,000 times in this series, which is
Yeah.
vampire gets beheaded.
I think that they took a misstep and are kind of doing a little bit of Monster of the Week style type stuff, trying to give us a story here and there that is sort of outside of the rest of the story. Like, obviously, it has to do with the apocalypse, the impending apocalypse, and the vampire transformations and all that stuff. But it's isolated. Like Emma going home with her father is isolated from the rest of the story until F and everybody comes to their house looking for people who are sick. Um, and the same thing with Ansel. And I think I agree with you. And if I recall in the books, I think that she actually did a little bit of that recruiting before
Yeah.
her demise. But I think that for the sake of having only 13 episodes, that she was going to be some easy fat to
Yeah,
trim.
but that's so disappointing because we spent time with her and she was a perspective character last week. Like
Yeah.
it followed her, and we talked about that how we kind of wish it would have followed him, Ansel,
Hmm.
but it followed her, and then her suicide occurs off screen with no indication that it was going to happen.
Yeah.
That's just so weird to me to to take the time to watch her, as we pointed out, take her shirt off last week because the room was hot, and then go over and pray and do like a prayer ritual, and like we were following the minutia of her daily life, like as her life was being shattered, and then this week, like for her to just pop up dead, like I feel like they cut like 2/3 of that story because they took the first part of it so slow, and then we just fast forwarded to the end is
Yeah.
very weird to me. Like very strange use of resources when your resource is screen time to not give her any screen time this week after giving her all of it last week. And I don't understand what the intention with that is.
I 100% agree with you. And the intention of it was that there needed to be room for Joan Luss. And I think that's, that's
Yeah.
really what it
Joan
boils
Less with
down
her
to.
triumphant return.
Who is the slowest to
Transform.
fall ill? Yeah,
Oh,
to
she's very ill.
transform. She's very ill, but she's definitely the slowest to transform.
Yes.
Everybody else is in the eating people stage,
Yes.
and Joan Luss is sort of sickly and wants to eat her children.
Yeah. Yeah, little creepy this week with the kids,
uh,
smelling the
but
kids.
I think that it would have been more effective, and maybe you will or will not agree with me, but maybe if they had kept Joan Luss and they'd kept all of those four survivor characters in the first four episodes, and then they all became monsters by the end of episode four or the beginning of episode five, and then we follow Anne Marie in episode five as opposed to in episode four. So we would get, I think that they didn't want to play all of their cards because they want to show each of those survivors have their own thing and give them their own moment. But I would rather just see little glimpses of Ansel drinking the
Hmm.
blood and like maybe watch him murder the dog because I think like as horrible as that is to watch, we all know if we've seen I Am Legend?
Totally.
Uh yeah, reference.
Yeah.
Like it's terrible to see dogs die. But
Sure.
like see that stuff, see Bolivar have his blood orgy, and then have Joan Luss like try to eat her children or something, and then watch what was her name, the maid. I
Eva?
took an Eva, yeah. So then watch Eva and Anne Marie and the manager and no, I guess there's nobody for the pilot, but like then watch all of those people have to deal with the aftermath of everybody's transformations. I think that that would have been exceptionally effective.
Yes.
I don't know if you
No, I think
agree.
I think I think there was a lot of ways you could go with it that would have been more effective than what's happened so far. Um, uh, I'm wondering, did why does nobody call the cops? Like, I don't. Not that the cops would help with the vampire apocalypse, but they don't know it's the vampire apocalypse. Like why isn't someone's reaction when Eva sees the Joanless blink her second set of eyelids? She clearly knows something is really wrong at that point. Like something has gone horribly wrong. Why does she just kidnap the children? Like I understand getting the kids out, but why wouldn't she call someone? Like what's the secrecy? And why didn't Anne Marie call it? Like there's all these. I just don't understand the way people behave on this show. Like
Well, yeah,
everyone is in a Halloween movie in terms of the
yeah.
way they're making decisions.
I think with Joan Luss is that she's a high-powered lawyer, and they probably don't want that. Eva would know better than to try to get that on the news. But with Anne Marie and Ansel, like, and Bolivar obviously doesn't want to be on the news, but like Anne Marie and Ansel, you'd feel like that could just be a story of her forcing him to see a doctor,
Yeah.
or something like that. But again, I think that that was just the mistake of having her perspective over his.
Yeah.
But but let's move on. I mean, I guess we've just covered Joan Luss. We now have come to Vasily.
Oh, Vasily.
Vasily
Yes.
Fett. my 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 bay.
Yeah, of course, naturally.
I love him. I love him so very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. He's
uh,
definitely the
Vas.
most direct character. There isn't
Yes.
a lot going on with Vasily in terms of what we've seen so far, which is
Yes.
probably good because the show isn't attempting to really have a whole lot going on. He's just the coolest pest control employee you've ever seen.
Well, and what I'm appreciating his character a lot. I mean, they haven't given him as much characterization as in the books, but there's not a lot more to go. He's very much just somebody who has been obsessed with pests his whole life
Yeah,
and made a career out of it. And now there's a new kind of pest around.
yeah,
And he happens to have a skill set that may or may not be good for that. So I really, I thought that entire sequence is incredibly effective. Of, they bring up what happened last week, and then he goes to investigate in the sewers because everybody's complaining about rats, especially the pretty girl who he likes.
mm,
And he goes down into the sewers, and like 20 vampires chase him.
yeah. All the
And
I imagine it's the plane crash victims
it's all the plane crash
who
victims,
commit their
and that
episode.
was fantastic.
It
I
was
don't.
pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I want from the horror of this show. I mean, I like to care a little bit more about the characters, and I think I care about Vass in a way um, from the books
Yeah,
still because there's not much to care about yet in the TV show. But I loved it. I loved it. That was one of those moments where I was kicking and screaming and so
yeah.
excited.
It was good. It was good. They could have taken a little more time with it. He pretty much found the
Yeah,
vampires immediately as he went down to the sewer. It would have been a
that's
it would have been a really cool story if it had happened like in the 10th minute of the episode, right after he had the conversation with the receptionist, and if he had entered the sewers and then the entire episode just been going through the sewers, and then at the end coming across the vampires, build the tension as opposed to just sort of having it happen in one quick scene. Having said that, that scene was really good and a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, again, the vampires are now taking over more and more of the stories on this show, which is only a good thing.
yes.
So,
Which again, as we talked about Nora a little bit earlier, the Nora having her
ugh.
you didn't like it?
Oh, whatever. it's, I guess I was happy to see Nora outside the. I mean, it's admirable because it was one of the things we mentioned how we didn't see Nora's family at all. So I was happy to see that they did have a story where Nora was outside of the vampire stuff and she was just dealing with her family the same way they did with Gus and they've done with F and all that. So that's good. Again, the material, I don't know.
Well,
It's all kind of mushy stuff that doesn't really like. Okay, this is my challenge for you.
okay.
Tell me what we learned about Nora from this episode, from spending a complete B story with her taking care of her mother at the nursing home. What did we learn about her that we couldn't have already reasonably assumed from her previous appearances?
I think that we learned that she's a little more gumption than maybe she shows when she's around F. She very much, and that might have been influenced by her love for her mother, which is certainly a different kind of love than she may or may not have for F, because we don't know how much they care about each other. But Nora, put her foot down with her mother plenty of times in that episode and still stuck it out to have that visitation, even though it was exhausting her. And I think that sometimes you don't always see characters in that light. I think sometimes they're really sappy and they start crying and they're so upset that their parent has, sort of fallen apart, or they yell and they storm off. But she was dedicated, she was there, but she wasn't having any of it.
So you're saying she showed the kind of gumption that she did not show at the end of last week's episode?
Yes, you're right. That's
Because
exactly.
this is the problem. Were it not for the end of last week's episode, I would have said that's a strong character with a lot of gumption. I could have gathered that. She seemed very competent. She, unlike F, was the one to realize that Abe was saying stuff that someone who with only with knowledge of the situation could know when when F just brushed Abe off at the airport. Like she was the one who seeked Abe out, and like that seemed like an extremely competent character with a lot of heart, and then at the end of last week, not at all. She just buckles under the pressure and bails. So okay, but then this week they go and show it again. Like I did. It's I don't know what we're learning about her. I don't know. I can't describe her. Like, what are the adjectives that you use to describe Nora? Like, smart, I guess, but again, she's been ignoring the vampire apocalypse, so I don't know how smart she is. Like, I don't know. I can't describe her. I don't know who she is.
That's interesting.
Who is she? Like from these 5 episodes, like what is that character? What is her like Vasily? I get it. Super confident guy, loves pests. That's really awesome. Suave. I got it. Good. We're good to go.
Right.
F. I get it. He's the overly committed to his work, difficult man who's brilliant and who's headstrong and who's single-minded and who's as destructive to himself as he is brilliant when it comes to his work. Like I get that. Who's Nora? I don't get Nora.
I think that you make a good point that the scene last week sort of breaks her character from how else we've established her. Because I would say, like, she's a junior at the CDC, but she is, she's working to be she's working to gain higher levels. She's trying to find new information. She's trying to
Open-minded.
Open-minded.
Except for last week when she was extraordinarily closed-minded and refused to acknowledge the scene in front of her eyes.
Right, I know, and that's the one. I mean, I've been struggling with that a little bit, and I keep saying that to me. It's just that's an act of trauma, that she's traumatized in that moment. And she runs away from her trauma. But then, with her mother, she has something to protect. She hasn't been able to fight any of the vampires, and this is the first time she pushes that desk in front of the vampire, and she runs with her mother.
And she runs away.
She runs away, which is another character trait of hers.
I was gonna say, yeah. By the way, a completely reasonable decision. I enjoyed, like, we took a break from the in two regards. This episode, we took a break from the horror movie logic. That was the first, because if it was a horror movie, she would have attempted to fight the vampires, and the second was Vasily actually going into the sewers during the day and not waiting the night inexplicably, because that would have also been a very horror movie decision to just go down at night after hours for some reason.
Right.
So I mean, I understand Nora wanting to get her mother out or running away, but again, at the same time, like, I'm not sure I'm going to give her open-minded, because she basically was not open-minded enough to recognize that this is now a world where slicing off the head of a vampire 8-year-old, while distasteful, is required. Like, this is an F got it immediately. And Abe understands it because he has a lot of experience with it, and Nora didn't. Nora was too close-minded to understand that, because F, by the way, is clearly right. Like, there's no question that is what's required. Like, whatever Nora is trying to do in this case is not the correct answer, because the answer is clearly to try to decapitate the vampires and burn the bodies, like as Abe's been saying since day one. And so, like, it's a challenge.
Well,
yeah.
She went into science to save people. I think this is a big character trait of hers. I do. That she went into being the CDC to save the world, and I think F went into the CDC to understand the world.
F gave her a speech that this is how you save the world last week, and it was 100% correct, because that's what last week you said, and F is basically, it's pretty clear F's role on this show is to save the world. And so if that's what Nora wants, it's pretty obvious that the way to do it is what Abe has been saying all along. And so for her to deny that because of trauma, and to basically just go spend time with her mother, that to me is not indicative of a character who is open-minded or strong, frankly.
Right.
And so I'm not willing to give her either of those adjectives. And so what are we left with?
Well, and then is this a mistake then on the part of the writing of the show. I mean, obviously, like because she is a female character. Because we've talked, you and I, in our off the record phone calls that we have
Yeah.
all the time, have talked about like the problem with television of writing female characters into a man's world,
Yes.
and then always trying to make that female character just be problematic for the male character's success.
Yes.
Um, is that the way she is being written in this TV show because she is a woman, or is it just because she just happens to be the character that has been poorly written?
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to separate because so much of the dialogue on the show is iffy that I'm I'm less inclined to attribute it to the problem that TV has with writing female characters as I am to attribute it with just the show struggling to write characters. and
Yeah,
and like it's done well with Vasily because Vasily is a very simple character, and it's done okay with F. It's at least made an effort with F because it has to, because F is the central character of the show. And
right.
so but other than that, I mean, it's difficult to really pick out any character that's working that well, that's been giving any kind of, like, I don't think Gus is any more multidimensional than Nora is. I mean, you could certainly like Gus more, which I think is a different conversation, but in terms of the effectiveness of the show writing him, I feel like it's the same level that Nora's on. So I don't know if this is a specifically a problem with the female character as it is just a manifestation of the show struggling to make its side characters feel meaningful.
Yeah, which is interesting. I'm still having trouble accepting that they're just side characters because, of
Yeah, they're
course,
not. That's the wrong word to use.
right.
She's a central character of this show.
Yeah, and so is and
So
you
is Gus.
so is
Yeah, we
Gus,
can figure that out. Yeah.
but I would say that the show definitely struggles to portray either of them as more than just what will become sidekicks, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
because they are each supposed to have their own strengths. The members of, you know, all of these people who are fighting the apocalypse, they're all supposed to have their own strengths. And I don't know that we're getting. I mean, one thing that that Abe said to F was, "Those who we hold dear, if they are turned, they come back and destroy the ones that they've loved the most." Right.
Yes.
So that's an important. This is why we're getting all the family stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of
uh,
sense.
so that's a very important line to think about. So we have to get everybody with we have to get everybody with their families. But are we getting? You're right. Are we getting anything more than just people who love their family?
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly so. Have we
you're
learned
so
anything
right.
beyond that?
Right. I mean, Vass, as far as we can tell, has a crush on a girl.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's all that we've got from him. F has Zach and Kelly, and I guess that's that. And then and Nora has the mother, and Gus has his mother and his brother. And so we have to see all these sort of
Right.
mundane relationship things to see the scary things that can happen.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just the material is so one note. It's just
Mhm.
with every single relationship you talked about there, it's like one loves the other.
Right,
They love each other. End of
right,
story. That's
right.
that's all we got. That's really, they're not doing anything on top of that.
Mhm.
Um yeah.
And that can be, and that's super problematic.
Yeah.
That's definitely it. I don't think that I have fallen in love with any of these
Right.
relationships. Like,
Yes.
and I have not yet. I mean, I love Vest because I love Vest,
Sure.
but I haven't fallen in love. I haven't fallen in love with any characters or the people who they hold dear or anything. I mean, they tried with Anne Marie and Ansel,
Yeah, they
but
killed them immediately.
yeah, they killed
Off
them.
screen for one of them.
And Joan Luss's children don't. There's no reason for us to care about Joan Luss and her
Why
children.
would we care about Joan Lust? She's a monster person, and I don't mean vampires. I mean she's just a horrifying monster. So I don't know why we're supposed to care about her.
Yeah.
Her kids seem very sweet, so that's good. But yeah, what I want to get into, since
Yeah.
we're basically through the episode now, right? Like
Yeah.
we come.
Well, except for the Nazi stuff.
Oh yeah. That was good. That was fine. That was fine. The strain getting really frisky with its flashbacks. By the way, the first time that the show has delved into flashbacks,
Yes.
and
Can I just say real quick?
yeah,
So I went and I studied World War II I went in 2009, the same year that I read the Book of the Strain. I came back from Germany after having visited Auschwitz and Birkenau and all that stuff. So I've seen the concentration camps and all that. And then I read the book pretty shortly thereafter. And the way that the master came into the bunks was exactly how I imagined it. And I just want to give a shout out to the set designers and the cinematographers and everybody else, if they might be listening to this, but bravo. That was exactly how I imagined it in my head, and it looked very realistic to what I had seen having been there. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that anymore. Nope. I was very excited about it, and it was just wonderful to see the master sort of flitting around and just eating people in these bunkers.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Yeah, so well done.
Yes.
But yes, okay. So you wanted to talk about something.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that, you know, on this podcast every week we kind of go through and point out all the silly, incongruous stuff. I talk specifically about a lot of the two-dimensional characters, and, you know, we just got done with this big conversation about all that. I'm still enjoying the show, and I know you're enjoying it even more than I am.
It's true.
And so I'm fascinated by what about this show is so good. Because there are so many problems, and maybe not even good, but what about it makes it so watchable? Because I really enjoy watching this show in a way that's unironic. Like, I enjoy watching Under the Dome too, but that's because I can make fun of it on Twitter. But I would watch this show if I didn't have Twitter, and so it's like I'm. It's so funny because there are so many problems with The Strain, but at the end of the day, I have a great time watching it sincerely, not ironically. And so it's just, I wanted to get your perspective on, like, what's working with this show? Why is it so watchable?
I made a note, because I write notes for every episode we're about to record.
Of course.
I had made a note, actually, from the beginning of the episode when the manager twists her ankle and walks out, and I thought it was sort of goofy. That was one scene that sort of jolted me out. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
But I wrote that it's very much, it's like watching like a drama, like almost like a crime drama, a procedural, that sometimes the dialogue feels like you're watching like a episode of Law & Order SVU, which is an incredibly watchable show, or at least it was for at least 8 seasons. So I think that's part of it, is that it knows it's confident enough in its material, no matter how silly or sort of out there the material may be, that it just kind of goes with it.
Yeah.
But I think the horror is there, and I think that there is that deep human connections that I'm curious about, and then there's also the fascination with the world falling apart. Like,
yes.
And I don't know if and I think the cinematography is great. As we talked about before, $300,000 went into just creating the monsters. The monsters are fantastic. The casting is pretty good. They may not get the most meaningful dialogue in the world, but I have enjoyed almost every performance except for Palmer's performance, who we didn't talk about yet.
Nor will we.
Nor will we. It was just a moment that he was on.
Sure.
And it's, for me, I think you and I have talked about this off the record before, is that I'm very much attracted to adult science fiction shows. And even though it's wacky, this is a show that's for adults. It's not the Vampire Diaries or whatever else is on the CW or Teen Wolf or anything like that. Like, I enjoy science fiction and fantasy that is written for adults and is set in an adult world. And I think that it's effective at that. And I think it's effective at exploring how adults react to these different sort of horrific situations. I also think it's edited well. I did have one note about weird editing in this episode, but like, I think that it is constructed well. It is a well-constructed show, even if it's a little wacky. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
It's hard for me to say, 'cause all that stuff, like, I definitely think it helps that the show looks so good, and the vampires and everything like that. Like, it's very convincing visually, which I think is a big aspect of why it's enjoyable. It's interesting to me because the thing I hate most, and I've written this in a lot of reviews for other shows, is a show like I don't have any problem with bad shows. Again, I reference Under the Dome every week. Like I delight in really bad shows, and I have a lot of tolerance for what I would consider bad shows that are or not even bad, but unambitious shows like the procedurals you mentioned, shows that aren't trying to be good. You know, they're just trying to basically be good enough for you to have on in the background while you live your life when it's on TNT in 10 years, and you know, and make that cable money. Like there's there's a there's this zone of shows where it's shows that think they're good but they're actually bad, that I have a real problem with. And that's the problem that I have with The Walking Dead, and that's the problem that I had with The Killing, basically anything on AMC since Breaking Bad and Mad Men, and a variety of other shows. That's the phylum of shows that really bothers me. And like when I pick my worst show every year, it's always from that class, because there's nothing I can't stand more than a show that thinks it's way better than it is. And The Strain is definitely that. The Strain absolutely thinks it's telling this amazing, complicated story about the apocalypse, when really it's basically telling a dressed up Halloween movie. But I like it anyway. And that's what's puzzling me about this, is that normally that kind of miscalculation about how serious your show is the number one turnoff for me. Like, I'm done with the show after that. It can do a million other things well, and I'm not going to get past that. But there's something about this where I don't know if it's the promise of the apocalypse. I don't know if it's the pacing of the episodes, which generally is very good, and or it's the direction. It's the acting. Like I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about this show that is very watchable, even as I have to adjust my expectations for what it actually is. And I'm really fascinated by that, because again, like, I spend an hour watching this show every week, and I don't go like, oh, I love that episode, but I always think like, I loved that experience. I loved hanging out in this world for an hour and watching vampires eat people. Like, it's I don't know, maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe I just like the sort of Netflix quality, like the Netflix horror movie quality of it, where I know that people are going to get eaten by monster vampires, and that's just fun. But it's really like, I really can't pinpoint why I enjoy this show so much, when everything about it would indicate that I would really be upset with it.
Well,
Yeah.
you and I both really enjoy the show Grimm, so much that we have a
True.
podcast during the fall season called Monroe's Comfy Sweater that you should check out if you watch Grimm.
Absolutely.
But Grimm is a show that we've come to the same conclusion about. That for a little while we thought Grimm didn't take itself seriously, and then, you know, with this season finale and all that stuff, we realized it took itself way too seriously.
Yeah.
And yet we enjoyed that ride.
Yes.
And I would also say that show is probably more geared towards adults than it is towards teens.
I would say so.
Is there something there, that these sort of horror, fantasy, sci-fi
sort of, maybe that's it. Maybe with sci-fi shows, they kind of have to take themselves seriously, unless they're like Firefly or something. Right. But they have to, in order to be effective, they kind of have to take themselves seriously, and that it's not as egregious when they don't live up to that self-seriousness, because we just sort of expect it. That you know, a sci-fi show has to commit to its own mythology, or else again, unless it's Firefly, it really has to have its own mythology and stick with that and like be serious about it, or else it's just going to be a joke and no one's going to care. Right. And so like, maybe that's it. That very well could be it, because I wasn't drawing the parallel between those two shows, because Grimm and The Strain are very different shows. Right. But there is, I think there's something to that, where maybe with a sci-fi show, it's not as bad for a show to sort of miss the mark in how serious it thinks it is.
Well, yeah. But you hate The Walking Dead.
Yes, but I hate The Walking Dead primarily because it's boring. That's the number one thing. The Walking Dead is barely a sci-fi show. Sorry, Walking Dead fans. The Walking Dead is a talking show. No, I'm not talking about the most recent season. I stopped watching. I've heard the most recent season is better. So I'm talking about the period of The Walking Dead in which I watched, which was like season 2 and 3 and some of 4. Like I watched and reviewed it, where it was like, if you really broke it down, The Walking Dead was just people sitting around farming potatoes. Like that was the number one action on The Walking Dead. Was dealing with chores.
Right.
Was The Walking Dead. But the
Right.
strain, for all its faults, really gets down to business. Like
Yes.
there is vampire stuff happening throughout the episodes, and that's what I mean about the pacing. Is that this, even when Abe delivers a 7-minute breakfast monologue, and we go into the first of his flashbacks, which really didn't have any action. That was before the Master showed up. That's a long sequence where there's what seems like a long sequence where there's no like death or vampires or anything, but then we get right back into it, and it really helps pace the episode. And there's never like a 30-minute span of the strain where something exciting doesn't happen, and that really, I think, has a positive effect on the watchability of the show.
I totally agree, and I think that sort of hilariously, Grimm is kind of the same way. Grimm has a lot of weird police procedural things going on, and then it has all. We're not going to get into the mythology, but then it has
No.
the monster of the week aspects
Sure.
that are sprinkled throughout, and it makes it very watchable, even when the show is too self-serious or when the show is too silly. It balances it out with everything that's sort of creepy about, because Grimm can be terrifying. There's scalping and things like that happen that's
Yeah.
not pleasant. Obviously, nothing like the strain. And then the strain, I agree with you though. It's like, there's all the moments where it's taking itself very self seriously, and like the dialogue's not all that great. And then you have all this amazing apocalypse story that's sort of, I don't know if I would call it, the backdrop is the apocalypse story.
Well, it's the foreground. It's the foreground of the
foreground.
strain. That's the difference with The Walking
Yeah.
Dead, right?
Yeah.
That I actually wrote this in my review. I'm glad we got around to it, which is that in the strain, the apocalypse is happening. In The Walking Dead, the apocalypse has happened.
Yes.
And that's the difference, is that we're building towards something. Because the defining thing in my mind when I was watching The Walking Dead is what are we working towards? What is the goal with this show? What are we trying to do? And never, again, in those first 3 seasons, did The Walking Dead establish any kind of goal that felt meaningful. In The Strain, there's a very meaningful goal, the most meaningful, which is saving the world.
Yes.
And that's like, if The Walking Dead had been set in the equivalent time, as in like right when the inciting event of the apocalypse happened, that show would have the same sort of propulsive goal. But it doesn't, and The Strain does, and I think that is what's really, frankly, carrying the show early on, is that we have something to look forward to. And which we never had in The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead has never given us anything to look
No.
forward to.
Would you say that The Strain is an event show? Because we've talked a lot about, like, obviously there's, I think, a show called The Event.
Yes.
Then there's like The Leftovers.
Good old BBC.
Yeah,
Trying to really capitalize on event programming by calling the show The Event.
Yes. Then there's Lost, and I think Lost counts in that category, and shows like that. Would you say that part of, or even Heroes is actually probably a really good analogy. Heroes is a little bit of a train wreck of a show, but that first season was phenomenal because you were waiting to see what would happen at the end. Would they save the cheerleader, and would they save the world? And then in The Strain, it's sort of the same thing. Is you're building up to an event that an impending event, something that that's going to happen. Would that be part of it for you too, or?
I think the genius of The Strain, and I use that word in the review, I'm now just shamelessly promoting my own review, but the genius of the show is that the event is baked into the world. And so we're going to see the event, but it's going to lead to the world. And I think that that's really interesting, that like all these post-apocalyptic shows, Walking Dead, Revolution, all these shows, we start within the apocalypse. With The Strain, we're starting at the start of the apocalypse. And so presumably, this show is going to have the event, but then it's going to grow into this post-apocalyptic world.
Yes.
And that's the interesting aspect of it, and that's what makes you feel like there's a real track here. We're not... The Strain is a long ways away from ever having to worry about settling, which is something that Revolution and Walking Dead I think, fall victim to a lot, which is, everyone gets stationary, and we start worrying about the minutia of these people's lives within this post-apocalyptic landscape. The Strain is a long ways out from having concerns like that. And so that's, I think, a real positive with the show going forward.
I would actually, I would make a comparison to the miniseries that was Battlestar Galactica before Battlestar Galactica became a TV show. I don't know if you ever watched the miniseries.
No.
But the miniseries was about the normalcy of this. I mean, it's science fiction. It's all these 12, I think it's 12 planets that all sort of coexist with the same government. And then some robots basically destroy all the planets, and there's like a couple thousand people left. They have to take off in some ships, and then the whole rest of the miniseries that later became a full TV show is them, having to survive, but you meet them in their normal lives. You meet them before the event occurs, and it's that same sort of genius of like, oh, now we actually have to follow them as their worlds have been torn apart and they've lost everybody that they've loved. And I think that I never thought that I would make a comparison between Battlestar Galactica and The Strain, but I think that that's a pretty strong comparison.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I didn't watch it, but it makes sense to me.
Oh, you should. The first the miniseries, which is the first 4 episodes, is some of the best television ever made. But yeah, I agree with you, and I think that that's absolutely what makes the show exciting, and it's what I've been just hoping for. And it's so hard on this podcast because I have read the books, so
yeah, right. You know what's going on, and
I know what's going on. I know how it's going to happen, but it's so exciting to see it played out, and I like the direction that the show is going, even though it's very different. And I've said this in our pilot episode of our podcast that I think it's smart when a TV show or a movie veers away from its source material, because you want to leave some surprises for the viewers. But yeah, that was a great talking point.
Yeah, no, I think that I think I have a little better understanding of why I'm still looking forward to this show every week and enjoying myself watching it, despite going on the podcast and complaining about it for an hour. Like,
I know.
But I hope viewers do too, because that makes sense to me. It's like, yeah, I don't think you need to unconditionally love everything about a show to enjoy the show.
Yeah.
And I do think that The Strain could be a lot better, and maybe will be a lot better, because I think a lot of the problems are very fixable, and hopefully this is just some struggles early, and but I'm still enjoying it and still very much on board. So yeah.
So we had a fan letter from Jordan. Did you want to shout out to Jordan?
Yeah, shout out to Jordan, who in my struggles last week, we really could just call the podcast Kyle's Struggles with the Strain, because I really just every week have these struggles. But
hashtag help Kyle.
Yeah, we talked about hashtag help Kyle last week, and Jordan sent in an email asking for help for himself because he was having the same kind of issues. So I appreciate the camaraderie.
Yes. And we want to say thank you again to all of our listeners, all 3,000 and more of you, for listening. And if you want to send us some fan mail for us to have some talking points, feel free to at thestrainpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, talk about anything.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Hopefully send us stuff on The Strain, but otherwise just send us fan mail. Send us your thoughts.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of thoughts on The Walking Dead. I think, Kyle, that you might be in trouble.
Walking Dead fans are going to hate me more than any other fan base. They're going to hate me more than when I was reviewing the show and gave every episode like a 5. Because I thought they were all the same. I'm really not in The Walking Dead's zone for whatever. People love that show. So I apologize to Walking Dead fans. I know you're not here for Walking Dead talk.
I'm sure that we can reconcile with them. All right. This wraps up our 6th episode of the Strain podcast. Before I go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our shows at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod, and Kyle and I at Blair Loves TV, and that's Blair with an E, and at Kyle Loves TV. Check out our website, showreadings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.